All right, let's do our flashcards on the bureaucracy, Unit 2D. There's only 10 flashcards for this unit. It's a shorter unit, but it's no less important than others, and the bureaucracy is a very important part of the U.S. government, and there are many different ways in which the bureaucracy impacts policy and in which they can do things that maybe the president or Congress wants them to, and in other instances, no, and they can be independent in many ways. So let's talk about different aspects of it. So the bureaucracy, just as a broad overview before we jump into it, it is simply all of the government agencies and organizations that function quasi-independently and carry out government policy. And consider them part of the executive branch, but they are certainly given powers by Congress. Congress can create an agency, and then the president can kind of run it. Now, there are different types of government bureaucratic agencies and departments. So we have cabinet departments. You get your 15 cabinet level departments, and these are very significant: Department of Education, State, Treasury, agriculture, interior, health and human services. So within these cabinet departments, you can have many, many, many people working to carry out and implement laws that Congress has passed or executive orders that the president has issued. But it's not just cabinet departments. You also have kind of cabinet level agencies, or kind of just a little bit beneath the cabinet. So executive agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency, or other agencies, maybe intelligence communities, the NSA, the CIA, the FBI. These are government agencies. They have a more narrow focus on policy. The Department of Energy, cabinet level department, and is something that kind of is a broad department. But you have other agencies that kind of work in more narrow focuses, like nuclear energy, for example. Independent regulatory commissions are part of the bureaucracy as well. In this case, they have a function that is designed to kind of help maintain usually stable economic growth or financial issues. So they're independent because the president appoints the heads of them, but they really do operate kind of on their own. The best example of one of these is the Federal Reserve Board. The Federal Reserve Board has huge influence on government monetary policy and the economy. The president appoints the chair of the Federal Reserve and the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. But they're basically the U.S. bank, and they have huge power over the economy. Some people say that the Federal Reserve chair is the second most powerful person in the world behind the president. And that may be an overstatement, but they have a huge, huge amount of power, and they're very independent, and they regulate aspects of the economy. And then finally, we have government corporations. A government corporation is something that exists and competes with other corporations that may exist in the private sector. The best example of this would be the Postal Service. They're part of the U.S. government, but they have to raise their own funds, and they compete for shipping with private carriers. So there are government corporations. Amtrak is another example of a government corporation in rail. So what do all these different agencies and entities do? Well, they carry out policy by doing a few different things. One is they write rules and regulations. So if Congress passes, for example, the Affordable Care Act under the Obama administration, there's a 2,500-page bill. A lot of what actually happens is stuff that is decided at the Health and Human Services Department. The law will say the HHS will create a marketplace for buying insurance, and they'll write rules about what different plans can have and not have, and then how those plans need to get approved by HHS, and they'll do all of those things. And so the Health and Human Services, they're kind of implementing the law. They're carrying out the policy. Congress isn't doing that. It's not, you don't. If you're a health insurance company, you're not working with an individual congressman to make sure you're complying with the law. You're working with career servants at the bureaucratic level, and they're the ones who are actually doing the kind of the nuts and bolts of carrying out policy. They'll issue fines. If you're a corporation and you're dumping pollutants where you're not supposed to be dumping them, you could be criminally punished for this if it's a willful violation of law. But you could also simply be fined for certain negligence or violations, and there could be different sorts of penalties if you haven't followed the rules. And then they also have testimony before Congress. I mean, one of the things that government agencies will do is basically come before Congress, and they'll have to kind of give updates on what their area of policy is, and updates on as an example, with Boeing. Their 737 MAX airliner had all sorts of problems, including two devastating crashes. And people who were in charge of the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, were called before Congress. How did you certify this jet when it clearly had issues? What were the problems with the process? And so Congress can get involved there. And so they'll also testify before Congress to try to tell Congress what laws need to be, or what they need to say in order for the agencies to kind of carry out their functions. So that's kind of some big picture stuff about what the bureaucracy is doing. Political theorists and scientists will describe bureaucratic agencies as part of an iron triangle, in which they are kind of one corner, right? A government agency. They interact with interest groups, and then they also interact with committees in Congress. So again, going back to the FAA, they're an agency that regulates air travel. They regulate flight. They regulate airplanes. They approve of all these things. But they work very closely, and perhaps too closely, with the aircraft manufacturers, the biggest one being Boeing. And that certainly maybe can be a relationship that's a little bit too close. So if the FAA gives favorable regulations to Boeing, they maybe make their jobs a little bit easier, but then maybe Boeing has a little bit too much power. Congress can step in. Boeing might be giving financial campaign contributions to Congress and lobbying Congress to do certain things, to loosen up regulations, or to tell the FAA they can or cannot do certain things. Congress can tell the FAA what their particular mandate is. They can have hearings, they can have oversight, they can change laws. So all three of these different entities, an interest group, like a company or something like that, a Congress and a congressional committee specifically, and because we know all the actions in Congress work in committees, and then your bureaucratic agency, they all are kind of working together on these policy issues, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it causes problems. But the people who work in the bureaucratic agencies, they're part of the civil service system. Most of these civil servants are merit-based, and the laws have changed over the years to make it so that to be in the civil service, it's not a political appointment. Most of the 2-point-something odd million people who work for the civil service, they're career employees. They don't lose their job when there's a new election. The people at the very top, they're political appointments. Okay, so there can be some political patronage that's involved, but most of that is weeded out over time. Laws have been passed and reforms have occurred to make it so that federal jobs can't be doled out for political reasons. It took a long time to get there. The late 1800s, they started this process of saying we've got this real corrupt system where the winners just kind of award jobs to their friends all across government. That can still happen, but most of the people who work for the bureaucracy are career civil servants, which is why politicians can get frustrated. Presidents in particular can get frustrated when the bureaucratic agencies don't necessarily carry out the policies they want them to carry out, or act in the way they want them to act, because they're not political appointees. There are political appointees at the top, though, and those cabinet level agencies, or maybe sub-cabinet. You can have Department of Justice, the Attorney General, and then the Deputy Attorney General. Those are both cabinet appointees, and they'll be appointed and then confirmed by the Senate. But most people have to pass an exam, and they're hired based on their qualifications and their skills. That's a merit system. Now, I'm not going to go through these flashcards in detail. These flashcards are modeled off a class exercise, flashcards 6 and 7. But these are examples of government agencies that we should be familiar with, what they do, how they function. And so, I'll just refer you back to the lesson we worked on in class where you maybe chose one of these particular agencies and did a little research on what choices they're making or rules that they're making. The idea of discretionary choice or rules, sometimes when the laws are not written in a real specific way, then people at the agencies can have discretion over how to interpret the law. And they can have power over decisions that are made. That's what discretion is. And they can also issue rules and regulations that people have to follow. And they have the force of law. Okay, they have the backing of law. If Congress doesn't like what a bureaucratic agency is doing, they can do a few things. They can hold hearings. And that was one of the videos that you watch. But you see these all the time when congressmen hold hearings and they potentially yell at bureaucratic officials. It could be very high-profile stuff, such as when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State and she was called before Congress when they were investigating a terrorist attack in Benghazi, Libya, in which an American diplomat was killed. That was very high-profile, and the Republican opponents of her were, very critical of her, and of course she had her supporters as well. But they can be high-profile events. Sometimes they're for show, but oftentimes these committee hearings do help shed light on what's happening. They're overseeing. Congress is overseeing, using their roles as the legislative body to oversee what the bureaucracy is doing, and they also control all of the funding for government agencies. And we talk about the federal budget when you're talking about non-defense, non-entitlement programs. Which is not a huge part of the federal government, but that's basically everything else is going in some way to kind of government agencies and the programs that they run, and they're implementing the funds. So, how much money goes to the Department of Education? How much money goes to the Department of Justice? How much money goes to environmental regulation? What are they doing? Much of the remaining funds goes to the programs the agencies are running. So Congress can oversee the bureaucracy, check and balances. The president can oversee the bureaucracy. They will obviously appoint the heads of it. And then really significantly, they issue executive orders. So they can issue an executive order saying, I want this agency to do this. I don't want this agency to do that. Barack Obama, he talked about how he issued executive orders instructing the EPA, for example, to start considering carbon dioxide a harmful pollutant to the air under the old Clean Air Acts, which are really designed to get rid of other pollutants, not necessarily carbon dioxide. But Barack Obama said, well, no, now I'm going to interpret the law. I'm going to tell you that you can regulate CO2. And they started regulating CO2. And so, executive orders have huge power over what the bureaucracy can do. And of course, they appoint the heads of bureaucracies, which is really significant. And then, of course, the Supreme Court has judicial review. And just like they can strike down laws of Congress, they can strike down executive orders as unconstitutional. They can also strike down actions of the bureaucracy as unconstitutional. The Supreme Court has immense power. The federal court system in general has immense power because of judicial review. So there's a little bit about the bureaucracy. Shorter unit, but again, these kind of real case studies we've kind of talked about in class to kind of shed some light on what the government agencies can do, understanding checks and balances and how that plays a role. And it looks like I skipped number 4. I don't know how that happened, but an issue network is just a broader, term for, kind of an interest group might be the Sierra Club, which is an environmental group, and an issue network might be the Sierra Club and other environmentalists who all together are working on a specific issue, and they're trying to influence the bureaucracy in that way. So sorry about skipping number 4, but I hope this was helpful. Have a great day.